Hello there. Welcome to our channel EditorialSpeech. Make sure that you hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to the channel for editorial reading. Let's get started with today's editorials. First article, The Adani Story and Indian Neoliberalism. A strike on the Adani Group by short seller the US-based Hindenburg Research has led to the unraveling of the Gautam Adani story, which celebrated the spectacular rise, in an extremely short period of time, of the wealth of a man and his business empire. Much of that wealth disappeared following a crash in the stock values that shaved more than $100 billion off the market capitalization of 7 publicly listed Adani Group companies. That led to the withdrawal, post-launch, of a $2.5 billion share issue and, possibly, of rounds of borrowing. Meteoric rise, capital-intensive projects. Following those events, attention has shifted to what this episode says about the larger Indian growth story. 2 features of the Adani story are of significance here. The first is that the gravity-defying climb in market value of the listed companies was accompanied by an expansion of the physical assets of the group that, in the same short span of time, displaced well-entrenched business groups that dominated India's corporate sector. That kind of rise had happened only once before, with the Reliance Group under Dhirubhai Ambani. As in that case, in this one too, the incumbent leaders could not stop the meteoric rise of an upstart group. The second is that the growth of the Adani Group occurred through investments largely in capital-intensive infrastructural areas, power generation, ports, airports, and roads, besides mining and metals. Till well into the era defined by the Indian government's embrace of neoliberalism, these sectors were largely the preserve of the public sector. This was not only because private entry was restricted by policy, but because even when such restrictions were being relaxed, private investment lagged. One reason was that these sectors required large investments, involved long gestation lags, and were therefore more risky. The other was that in many of these areas, the pricing policy of the government and of the public enterprises were such that when profits were made, projects were less profitable than elsewhere. Rising to dominance in these areas was not, therefore, the same as entering into the provision of offshored software services, for example. That was the area which in the not-too-distant past delivered high profits and triggered a rapid rise in market valuation of the companies that made their promoters India's new billionaires. Infrastructure needs large outlays, and the rewards are limited even when positive. Entrants into the infrastructural sectors need to risk large volumes of capital, only a small proportion of which can flow from the own coffers of a fledgling entrepreneur. Gautam Adani not only invested in more than one such project in any single infrastructural area, but also made investments in greenfield projects or acquisitions to build large asset shares in multiple areas. His genius seemed to lie in the ability to mobilize the resources required for this near impossible task. The favorable factor. When climbing that hill, Mr. Adani was undoubtedly favored by features of India's neoliberal policy regime after the turn of the century that underpinned the spike in GDP growth to around 8% per annum during 2003, 04 to 2011 to 12. One was India's success, especially after 2003, in using liberalization to attract large inflows of foreign financial capital into its bond and equity markets. The consequent surge in domestic liquidity swelled deposits in India's banking system and set off a credit boom. Banks looking to expand their loan base had to resort to aggressive lending practices that took them into new areas, including infrastructure, which was earlier considered too risky. This shift was encouraged by contradictory elements of the neoliberal growth strategy. On the one hand, the government focused on building infrastructure needed to support a private sector-led growth strategy. On the other, it was committed to both incentivizing the private sector with tax concessions, as well as veering in the direction of fiscal conservatism that abjured debt-financed expenditure. To ensure both, spending had to be reined in, including public investment. That raised the question as to which actors would invest in the infrastructure, since, till then, the private sector had largely shunned that domain. To resolve this conundrum, the neoliberal state chose the option of getting the private sector to do the job, attracting it by promising support to mobilize the required resources, as well as to de-risk and improve the profitability of such investments. Subsidies and viability gap funding from state coffers and flexible pricing were examples of such support. A crucial component of that agenda was the provision of large volumes of credit from a public banking system awash with liquidity to private sector firms investing in infrastructural areas. The spate of reports that followed the Hindenburg hit, some of which contain convincing data, suggests that the Adani Group benefited disproportionately from these features of the neoliberal policy regime. It borrowed heavily from public sector banks, as well as obtained equity financing from public financial institutions such as the Life Insurance Corporation of India, to establish a presence in a range of infrastructural areas in a short period of time. Benefits did not stop there. Evidence suggests that official permissions, easy environmental clearances, access to land, and convenient policies combined to drive the Adani expansion, as well as convey the impression that the group was too important not to succeed. It was inevitable that this special treatment that contributed to the group's race to the top would be attributed to the proximity of group founder Gautam Adani to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The ideological case for incentivizing the private sector can, after all, provide the excuse for excessively favoring one or more private players, for whatever reason. Contrary to the rhetoric of neoliberal advocates, the embrace of markets does not increase transparency and reduce bias, regulatory restraint. In fact, rumors of state patronage possibly also encouraged foreign bond and equity investors searching for higher yields to buy into Adani whenever the opportunity arose. But possibly influenced by the need to retain control over a capital-thirsty business, Adani seems to have preferred debt, with free floating shares of its listed companies available for trading being a small proportion of the total. To mobilize that credit, Hindenburg argues, and many others concur, the group used related party shell companies claiming to be independent to park finance in tax havens abroad, that was then used to acquire the shares of Adani firms. That helped raise share values to unwarranted levels, but, despite red flags from multiple sources, that did not evince any scrutiny by Indian regulators, whether of the Adani firms, the foreign investors, or the banks investing in and lending to the companies. State support was combined with regulatory forbearance. The resulting soaring share values served in more ways than raising Gautam Adani's wealth status. They helped to mobilize large volumes of credit from domestic and foreign financial firms by pledging shares with inflated values as collateral. Finance did not seem a constraint that could stop the group's expansion. Till Hindenburg came along. The Adani Group sought to dismiss the allegations of the short seller and tellingly suggested that this was not just an attack on the group, but on the Indian success story. But that does not seem to have convinced private creditors and investors. Share prices collapsed, leading to margin calls from those holding shares of inflated value as collateral. Thus far, Adani is holding out, even opting for early repayment of loans totaling $1.1 billion and releasing some pledged shares of group companies. But the story being told has not yet reached completion. What it has already made clear, however, is that neoliberalism is not about market competition and transparency, but an instrument to engineer income and wealth redistribution, in this case in favor of one individual and his group. Next article. Shaping a more disabled-friendly digital ecosystem. The estimation in Census 2011 that 2.21% of India's population is disabled is a gross underestimation. According to the World Health Organization, about 16% of the global population is disabled. If that figure is extrapolated to the Indian context, it would mean at least 192 million disabled people. While technology has enormous potential to level the playing field for the disabled, it can, at the same time, reinforce the barriers that the disabled otherwise face if it is not designed with their needs in mind. Here is another point. India, it is reported, had 750 million internet smartphone users in 2020. Applying the 16% figure here, this works out to be roughly 120 million, 12 crore, internet smartphone users with disabilities. Apps and an evaluation. There is no denying the fact that our lives are increasingly being led digitally, especially in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. We use apps to order groceries, food, medicines, in dating, socializing, entertainment, and education. Being blind ourselves, we know that there is a long way to go when it comes to making apps disabled-friendly. To provide evidence-based assessment of the problem and spur conversations and reforms, we co-authored, with like-minded colleagues, a report that evaluates the accessibility of 10 of the most widely used apps in India across 5 sectors. These sectors were chosen based on broad stakeholder consultation with people with disabilities, and the 10 apps based on the amount of online traffic. The apps were Zomato, Swiggy, Paytm, PhonePe, Amazon, Flipkart, Uber, Ola, WhatsApp, and Telegram. We used the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, a set of globally recognized parameters to determine how disabled-friendly an app or website is, to evaluate these apps. Based on the number of violations, we categorized the level of accessibility of the apps as high, medium, and low. Our report found that 4 out of the 10 apps ranked low, while 5 were in the medium category. The report was launched on January 13th by Rajesh Agarwal, Secretary, Department of Empowerment for Persons with Disabilities, Government of India. We invited representatives of all 10 apps to attend our event. We think that it is no mere coincidence that the only app which sent a representative was the one ranked high in the index, that is, WhatsApp. This is a pointer to the need to work with intentionality in creating disabled-friendly infrastructure, either physical or digital. Our goal for launching this report and rating index was not to call out apps that were inaccessible, but instead to start discussions on digital accessibility, product design, and the development process. In fact, this project has 2 phases. The launch of the report was the culmination of the first phase, where we objectively assessed the digital accessibility of the apps. The second phase is to work with these service providers and help them design practices and processes that will not only improve app accessibility, but also educate their stakeholders about accessibility and people with disabilities. This will hopefully improve design and development practices so that the apps are accessible right from the inception, and we do not have to remediate for accessibility. We think that this will also help change attitudes around disability in the country, especially within the business community, moving them away from a charity approach to a rights-based and investment outlook. Use of AI and algorithm. As with other sectors, we are excited by the role technology can play in our efforts. We currently use technology to automate a large number of accessibility tests, and combine that with in-depth manual testing to provide comprehensive accessibility feedback to developers. AL can help to further automate the accessibility testing process, and feedback from users with disabilities can now be analyzed at scale to provide actionable insights to developers and companies. All of this is core to this project and our initiative, and we look forward to making these tools available broadly. While our hope is that this know-how combined with our advocacy will encourage companies to do the right thing by incorporating accessibility, we will not shy away from legal recourse as the last resort either. There have been positive developments from the courts lately on the need for accessibility across sectors, and we hope to use it to push for more accessibility should the need arise. Core to the project of securing a more disabled-friendly digital ecosystem must be the conviction that everything digital must be accessible to everyone, as Mr. Agarwal put it in his keynote address. This starts with incorporating the principles of accessibility and inclusive design into every digital offering, right from inception. India needs to be truly accessible for all people with disabilities. Organizations, companies, civil society, the government, and the courts must make this happen. That's it for this video. Thank you for giving your precious time to our channel. Please support our channel by subscribing to it, liking it, and sharing our videos with other students. This helps us reach more and more students.